So I'm going to take it, the first question, right back to the sort of start of this whole conversation. So we keep free space from buildings, or we get rid of buildings and we make gardens, and we look after these gardens, and then we make buildings and put them back in the gardens to appreciate the gardens. And I just want to get your thoughts on what our fascination is with pavilions sited in gardens.
Fascination with pavilions in gardens. I probably can't answer that. What a sort of general fascination with pavilions in gardens is. I mean, I've kind of practiced. I've done a pavilion in the Netherlands, and which is in a Baroque garden, and it kind of served a particular purpose, and that pavilion, in my thinking, was connecting back to the history of the Baroque and the idea of the folly and the pavilion in the kind of garden. And so Leon would be much better equipped to answer this question historically, but the pavilion form has been around for a long time. And the mention of the World Expos happened earlier, and clearly that is something I'm very interested in. I have rebuilt one of those pavilions, Habitat in '67, and I am very interested in the way nationalism is inscribed at World Expos. And how it changes from time to time, and there are all those kind of incredible moments, but there's also these, more trivial moments in those things. And I guess what I'm interested in the World Pavilions is the way we fill up the story of nationalism, or these kind of conventional stories of nationalism and linear histories inside those national pavilions. So there's this kind of architectural edifice, and then how it's filled up. For me, it's not really answering your question, I'm sorry, but it's really about what I'm interested in this too, is how this pavilion's being used and occupied. Yeah, and so what about, I want to talk about Grotto a little bit, but before that, thinking about the pavilion as an activated space, like this model that's full of programming. And I wonder if you have thoughts or around whether a pavilion should go down this activated path, or whether the architecture can speak for itself and be its own agenda. There's two, I guess, different paths, and maybe you could talk about that. Or well, I remember, and Sean was talking about it, I think Matthew Ward in Architecture Australia wrote a criticism of the pavilion before it had even started, saying that it was a real missed opportunity, unlike the Serpentine, that allowed the architecture to be a kind of, or for the architect to be kind of unfettered in their exploration of form, and the level of programming that was going to be activated around this pavilion was going to suffocate that opportunity. And in fact, I think that the level of programming around this pavilion has been the success of it. And I've been surprised and pleased that that's been the case, and it's been occupied in all sorts of ways. And in many senses, that hasn't been too controlled as well, how it's occupied. And when you talk about kind of occupation, the kind of the structure itself, for all its beauty, kind of falls away, and you have to kind of negotiate in all these different ways. And we've done a number of projects here, and one where we did this Wearing the City project, and we had to work out how to mount images around these columns, and so we had to kind of invent a way to do that, and that kind of provisional way of negotiating space was very interesting and inventive. And then there have been little conversations. Sometimes there's 3 people here, and sometimes there's 100 people here, and the way it waxes and wanes. So it's interesting to me that is a kind of point of difference from something like the Serpentine or other pavilions, where the emphasis is as much on the programming and the kind of occupation, and the kind of building falls away in that sense. And I think that's been one of the highlights for me about this particular structure, is that it works really well for really intimate, small conversations, but then also larger, more crazy events. Do you think that's got to do with the architecture, the gardens? What's really creating that relaxed
informal, pleasurable experience. I think.
Oh yeah, certainly the site, an incredible site, and the fact that it can open up and it's quite a simple structure, and it can be used in multiple ways. All those things I think make that possible, and I don't think it's an over-determined structure at all. And I'm not sure, we didn't talk about that, Sean and Naomi didn't talk about what the kind of brief was in terms of programming, and that would kind of be interesting to think about what the future ones might be, and how that conversation might be had around, the specificities of programming in relation to what we've seen here. Yeah,
I think that it's a fun model that over the next 4 years, hopefully longer, each summer we'll get a completely different style of pavilion, and how that will affect the mode and the feeling, and it gives an opportunity to experiment a little with the form of the pavilion and the programming inside. Anyway, it'd be good to talk about the Pavilion Grotto in the Netherlands, because I guess that it was a fully functioning pavilion.
Well, it was all about how it was going to work. I mean, even though it was, I'm not an architect. It is, and that's the thing about pavilions that I quite like. There is a sense that a certain type of art practice and architecture can intersect. And for me, the Grotto Pavilion was symbolic space. For those who don't know, it's essentially a black kind of Mesian box that sits in the middle of this Baroque garden with these intersecting paths. And I wanted to do something that disappeared against the forest behind it. And that is it's a two-way mirrored glass, and at a certain time of day, these lights come up at the intersection between the sort of inside of the glass and this grotto-like sculpted form, and the kind of glass falls away, and then you can go inside the grotto, you go down into the grotto, and it is a functioning, well, it's a grotto, it's a functioning kitchen and ticket office and performance space, and there is also a restaurant outside. And so it is this kind of permanent, well, it's not permanent, it's kind of, it was a sort of impermanent permanence. There was a society for the grotto formed about 6 months after it was made to preserve it, because it has a 5-year lease. So I actually don't know what the future of it is. It's about 5 years ago. And, it's probably a bit longer. But anyway, the idea of this kind of the negotiation with the Baroque, or the idea that it would kind of disappear and have these two different surfaces, and you would transition from outside to in and have completely different experiences, is important part of what I do, I suppose, in the construction of atmosphere or ambience, and I'm interested in that. But the fact that it was going to be a ticket office and used and interacted with was the most important thing. And
and so did you have to approach it quite differently to your other work? Did you?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose there are other things I've done where they're large-scale installations and you go inside them and there's an immersive experience. And you shift from one thing to the other. So there's this sort of dialectical relationship between those two things. Yet those, the kind of function of those was simply about bodies moving through them, less about occupying them. So, yes, for the grotto, because you had to occupy it and use it, I had to think about it differently. But I worked with a local architectural firm, so it was really a conversation between us as well. So it's very easy to make something, an installation that you can go into for a certain period of time, the duration of a show over 4 weeks or 6 weeks or whatever it is. Not so easy to do something that's going to be, have that experience, but have it to, go on interminably.
Yep. And you've exhibited in the Australia Pavilion in Venice, and I'm just wondering...
No, I never exhibited in the Australian Pavilion.
No.
I made my own pavilion.
Oh, you did? Oh, okay. All right. Good. Any hard and fast rules about what a pavilion is or isn't for you? Or can it be anything? Is it a catch-all?
Oh yeah, I think that is a very open idea. You know, and I, as I said, I'm not an architect, so I approach it from a different place, and it can be a bit of sculpture. It can be kind of an interactive, immersive environment. It can be a pure form of architecture. It can be it's quite open, which is why I like it. So no rules at all. And in Venice, when I did Venice, there were 3 artists that went, and so Daniel von Sturmer was in the pavilion, the old pavilion, the Philip Cox pavilion. In fact, Ronnie D'Estasio, I think, has bought that pavilion. Is that right, John? And he's going to, rather perversely, I must say, and he's going to relocate it to his property down in where is it? Where's it? Yarra Valley. So the guy that worked so hard to get rid of that pavilion has now bought it to relocate it. It sounds like something I might do, actually. I was kind of a little bit envious of him. But so 3 artists, and I rebuilt my family home from the 70s as a pavilion outside.
Okay, good. So I'm wondering, if you were to do a scaled down version of MPavilion, what soundtrack might we expect on the inside?
Yeah. I mean, I suppose the soundtracks I've used in the past have always been about somehow corrupting the interior.
Yes.
And contrasting a kind of experience of it, so a sort of violent party inside the Farnsworth house or something. And I've always thought in fairly dumb ways about those things. So, no, I don't know, and I wouldn't like to say. I'd probably get into trouble. But no, I don't know.
Don't know.
Don't know.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
Very good.
Probably Sean talking. You know, I don't know. Well, anyway.
Anyway, what else have I got for you? What else can we talk about?
Yes. Oh, awkward silence.
Yeah, it is.
Well, can I
Leon,
can I pursue one thing a bit further? Because, I mean, there is this nervous boundary between art and architecture, and you're skating along the edge of it all the time. And I hold the opposite view to Matthew Ward. I think the Serpentine forces architects to do bad art. And it actually, removing programming means that you empty the content out of the architecture completely, and you're just there with the form. And one of the huge problems for the world at the moment is the way in which dictators of one sort or another are dropping large autonomous objects on their cities. And you in a sense create autonomous objects, but they have a scale which is in a different way. I mean, how do you negotiate that? How do you stop yourself becoming a quasi-architect, and how do you maintain this thing in the realm of an artistic practice?
Well, I've never consciously thought about those. I mean, I'm aware that I'm perhaps close to the boundaries between various things, and I've always liked the idea that you can push up to a boundary as close as possible, and you know that on the other side of it, it is absurd. So it's kind of, but it's not consciously testing it. I've never been thinking about that. I'm equally as interested in architecture as I am in art, as I am in cinema, as I am in all sorts of things. And I like to kind of find a way to include all those things in it. And so, you know, I do move around a bit, you know, in how I practice. And part of that moving around, I think, is to do with wanting it to always be a bit unstable. So the instability of it is the thing that I am particularly interested in. Not that I consciously think, oh, I can, if I do put that with that, it's going to make a kind of unstable thing. But there is a little bit of sort of dumb thinking like that, you know, putting two opposites together to produce you don't know what. So I sort of use architecture in a way, or the form of it, or the idea of it, and couple it with something else, or equally, you know, I use art in the same way. I just happen to operate in the context of art largely, and these things like the Grotto in the Netherlands, or so theatre design or something, that's when I'm stepping out and I have to kind of negotiate these questions, I suppose.
And could you talk a bit about the billboards, because that's an extraordinary appropriation, which in one sense is about the signage that's all pervades the city, but on another you've extracted a beauty from billboards that many people didn't realise was there.
Well, I mean, the billboards came out of a specific project, which was a collaboration with a theatre maker called David Pletcher from Not Yet It's Difficult for the Adelaide Festival, and we made a kind of model of a drive-in cinema, and I actually projected 2 films out of an adaptation of Villa Savoy, and so I turned that into a projection booth, and it projected these films on these 2 drive-in screens. And so I was kind of looking at that form then, and then I kind of thought about that form because it was between painting and sculpture, and it was about kind of projection, about film. And in a sense, it was a repository for all those kind of different forms that I was interested in including, and was kind of unstable. And so once I sort of pulled that out of that particular collaboration, I started just working that form, I suppose, and I started doing things like projections that weren't filmic, so painted or perspectival or ruptures into the screen. And yeah, there is a kind of beauty in the ordinary, I suppose, and the way they sit in the landscape was always kind of remarkable. And that's something I've always been interested in. If you stare at something long enough, you know, it starts to look beautiful to you. And maybe if you make a kind of point of repeating that over time, other people kind of become engaged with it. And I've done it on a number of levels. I actually did one at Monash outside Mumma, which is sort of reversed, as if it's somehow been there before and the buildings were built around it. There's a bit of sort of archaeology, but it's over-determined. Its structure is kind of over-determined. So I was thinking about how beautiful those structures are, which we talked about the Eiffel Tower, which was originally a functional object that was aestheticised over time, clearly. And
maybe just while you're both there, Dan, when you do these ephemeral projects, if we look at Callum, we can go and we can see all of the work. It exists. It stands there. You can see what the history of the practice is. How do you harvest a legacy out of all of your ephemeral interventions?
It's a hard one, and something that we're always struggling with, because we're sort of dealing with outcomes that are intangible. You hope that benefit comes out of them, but it may be a trickle on in a space where where you don't see that occurring. But on a simple level, it's documenting in the best way that you can through, like we're doing today, through video and photographs, and creating archives of those programs. Definitely on the online space, but how you could transform something that happens in the physical space to a printed space. It really is thinking about how to push something on into a different format to keep it.
Yeah, so a PhD student could take your archive and come up with propositions about the nature of that practice.
Yes, please.
Another generation.
Thank you.
And Callum, have you had a PhD student working on your work yet?
Yeah, I have had a couple, and they come and talk to me. Yeah, okay.
Bye.
Yeah, so just finish.
I'll talk through it. Yes, and it's always very strange, I think, when someone's coming to... But, yeah.
Thank you very much, Dan Honey.
Thank you.